This is What the Floor from TNA Supply Company, Inc., a podcast for the flooring industry. I'm Holiday Van Aram.
And I'm Michael Gurria. We're going to explore the hot topics of the flooring industry with a little humor and a new set of eyes.
Good morning, Michael.
Good morning, Holiday. How are you?
I am tired.
Yes.
It's been, we've had all-day meetings the last couple of days, and I've had crazy stuff going on at home, and I'm just exhausted and ready for the weekend.
Well, it feels like that time of year, so let's fire it up.
So, very exciting episode today. I feel like we're going to get schooled. That's how I'm feeling.
That's the goal.
So, we are focusing on sound abatement. That is a topic that comes up so often in conversations that we have with our customers. This is a daily basis. We have consumers that send in emails to our TAS flooring website asking for IAC ratings or STC ratings for their condo associations. And they don't even really understand why they're even asking or what documentation they want. And it's a really confusing conversation for most people that I talk to. Well, I mean, what's been your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this has been our most requested podcast topic over the last several months, but we've been afraid to tackle it because neither of us are professionals on sound abatement.
We are not experts.
But lo and behold, we found the diamond in the rough.
We did. We were referred by one of our own internal members who overheard us having a conversation about trying to find an expert, and she was like, I know the guy.
Yep.
And so that's who we have with us today. Daniel from Intertech, can you please introduce yourself to our listeners?
Yeah, absolutely. My name's Daniel Moeller, and I'm the project lead at Intertech in York, Pennsylvania. So I'm in charge of our vertical acoustical chamber. So I test everything floor ceiling related. And I've been at Intertech for coming up on 10 years. January will be 10 years. And I was hired right when we built this acoustical chamber here in York. So for every single test that was done here in York, I've been involved in that. I've probably done 20,000 acoustical tests. So hopefully I am that guy that can be your expert. But what I also do, I love sharing knowledge about this topic. So I'm super excited for the opportunity to chat with you guys. And this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. And anytime I can talk about it, when I start talking about sound abatement, my wife will occasionally eyes will glaze over.
For sure.
So I'm happy for the opportunity to talk to you guys.
Wonderful! I'm so excited. 20,000 sound tests.
That's
That
great.
is incredible. I'm so excited about this. Okay, so my first question: what are IAC and STC ratings? What does that mean?
Yeah, absolutely. That's one quick thing before we jump into that. I just want we run our laboratory here because you were pointing out how popular this topic is and how in demand this testing is. We run our laboratory here 7 days a week from 6 a.m. to 5 p.m. So we're actually running 77 hours of testing a week.
Wow.
So that's just and we're scheduled out a month or two. So that just shows you how popular this testing is. And the testing that we do 90% of the time is STC and IIC. That's the most commonly requested test. And STC is airborne sound. So that's like if your upstairs neighbor is blasting TV or radio or screaming at each other. That's what STC would be in relationship to. And honestly, STC is probably the least impactful, or the one you get the least complaints about, because most buildings are built pretty good on the STC side. So almost every kind of baseline building has a pretty decent STC performance, and that's usually not where your noise complaints are coming from. The noise complaints are usually coming from the IIC, which stands for Impact Isolation Class, and that would be your upstairs neighbors dragging furniture around, walking, jumping up and down. And that is what is complained about a lot. And that's what that's what flooring and underlayment can have a really big impact on. And so STC is E9, ASTM E90 is the test method that gives us an STC result, and that's that airborne sound. And ASTM E492 gets us that IIC, and that's the impact. And again, that's the one that you guys probably get the most emails about.
Yeah, for sure. Now, is it the same test for both? Is it the same style test for both?
Yeah, we almost always run them in conjunction with at the
Okay.
same time. So we install a flooring and a system, and we can run. The funny thing too is that the tests themselves take about 15 minutes, where a lot of times I'll spend weeks and weeks preparing for a test, and then the test is done in 15 minutes, and I throw it out and move on. So it can be a little bit depressing when you're doing all this work. Let's say, for example, you're testing like a really beautiful terrazzo flooring that you sent and it cured up, and you're putting it over top of a gypsum concrete that cured for 14 days. You might do all this work, and then 15 minutes later you're done. But yeah, most every system could have an SDC and an IIC result. There are some of my clients who will save some money and only do one or the other. But whenever that happens, you typically have the architect or designer who says, I need both, and you only have the one. So my company always runs both so that we can be the hero in that situation and say, oh, we actually have that data for
Right.
you. But yes, every time you have a flooring and underlayment installed, you could run both an SDC and an IIC test. And yeah, they go in conjunction with each other.
Okay.
Okay. So what does that 15 minutes include? What is the test
Yeah.
that's being done?
Yeah, it's fun. We also, if you ever have people that want to see testing, our door is always open, so you can come to Intertech and actually
Ooh.
watch a test, witness it. We love to have visitors. We do a lot of visitors with college tours, everything. But so the first thing I want to say before we get to what the test is, and this is literally the only thing. If your listeners only remember one thing that I said, I would love them to remember that when we get an STC or IIC result, it is not for the product alone. There's no such thing as an STC or IIC for a flooring or an underlayment. If anyone says that, they're immediately kind of not really describing it correctly. STC and IIC is a result of the entire system from the top to the bottom. So if there's a flooring and underlayment, that result will be different whether it's on an 8-inch slab, 6-inch slab, on an 18-inch open web truss, on a 2x10. So the acoustical results are of a system, not of a product. And that's probably the most common misconception. Everybody believes their underlayment is an IIC 72, and that is incorrect. It's the system. So that's the first thing I want to just kind of point out. But
Mhm.
for the test itself, for our STC test with the airborne sound, I do two background measurements where I have nothing turned on, no speakers or anything, and I just measure the level in our acoustical chamber. And the funny thing is, our acoustical chamber just looks like a big square box, but it actually is about $1.5 billion building that's very well isolated, and we use all the highest technology to measure all the frequencies like extremely accurately. So whenever I see some people doing field tests with their iPhone and a microphone, of course that's decent, but I have much higher level of quality equipment to do our testing. And then for STC, it's relatively straightforward. I blast a ton of sound in the upstairs chamber in our what we would call like our second story. I blast around 120 decibels of sound, which would be equivocal to 2 jet engines running simultaneously.
Right.
And what I measure is I measure how loud it is upstairs and how loud while those jet engines are running, how loud it is in the lower chamber. And the more sound the system stops, the better the rating is. So the more airborne sound you stop, the better you do. And then I do another really quick measurement that is an absorption measurement of my receive room. And that is like kind of like a lab to lab correction factor. So if one lab was more absorptive than the other, it would correct for that. So the STC test takes about 5 minutes of the 10. It's really straightforward, blast a lot of sound, and figure out how much sound the system is stopping. Um, and then for IIC, it's relatively simple. I do those same two background measurements, but I use a thing called a tapping machine,
Right.
which is a calibrated device that drops these impact hammers. There's 5 of them, and they drop it from 40 millimeters high, and they just basically keep impacting the flooring and underlayment combination or the system, whatever I'm testing. And I do that tapping machine in 4 different locations. So I move it around so that I get a good average representation of the entire flooring system. So I basically run the machine, move it, run it again. I do that 4 positions, and those positions are defined in the ASTM standard. So I just basically follow that standard, and then I do that same absorption measurement. And for IIC, I'm only concerned with the sound in the lower chamber. So if it's quieter when I'm running this tapping machine, then it is going to get us a better IIC result. So the more sound you stop with from this tapping machine. I get a lot of people that ask me like, oh, is that like somebody walking around, or is it what real world sound is that like? And there's really not a good comparison because it's like 5 hammers hitting the floor, because that's what's happening. So there's really no kind of correlation to what a human would be doing. But it's the machines are very calibrated. They cost around $6,000 or $7,000, and we have a couple of them, and that's what we use for IIC.
That is so interesting. I mean, in my mind, as he's describing these tests, I'm thinking, why are we so obsessed with this? Why are we so obsessed with how much sound is going to be transmitted in these environments?
Yep.
And we're testing for such large noises compared to what we're really doing inside of a home. And just the point I think is fantastic, that this is a system rating. This isn't the flooring itself on its own. And we're so obsessed with this floor gives you this sound rating, but we don't ever explain with that rating. You have to go into the fine print to find out what the system was, what they tested it with. And it's so crazy to me. When did we get so obsessed with this?
I want to ask a question then. So from a sales standpoint, how should we be selling? Let's say we have a product that has an IIC of 54. That's just it's not just the flooring. I mean, it's the whole system. So how do we sell that in a market that's so confused with IIC and STC ratings?
Sure.
We need to educate people more. I get that, but there's got to be a better way for us to be selling this, for us to be talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, from my perspective, if a job is large enough that you would sell, maybe more than 10,000 square feet of flooring, what you really should do in that situation is ask the person who's installing it, what building is it going in? What's the makeup of your building?
Yeah.
And then your company could provide them acoustical results that are absolutely correlating to their building. And what most companies do is they might even actually have some testing from me that kind of covers their bases, right? You might have tested on 5 systems that would be pretty close to what every building would be. So for example, commercial construction, most concrete slabs are either 6, 7, or 8-inch thick. If you could only do one test with me, if you tested on the 6-inch concrete slab, that test report would be really applicable to anyone doing something a little bit thicker, right? So I would say the 6-inch slab is kind of like your worst case test. So an IIC 54. So when you said you had an IIC 54, I wanted to say, hey, make sure you say IIC 54 on a 6-inch slab.
Right.
That's how we should.
Okay.
That's exactly how we should talk about IIC. It should not. It should be that it needs to have that information, or else you're not. Or else you're kind of. I'm always like, what? Like on what? Or like I'm always like, finish that sentence, right? Give that detail. And so here's kind of the reality of what you can do. You can, as a company, you can really good, accurate data that would represent that building. And in my mind, you could be known as the person who's really going to give them the right flooring for their project. Or you could kind of test, in almost ridiculous assembly and get a really high number and give them that test report. But in my mind, that's kind of not the best way to do business, because that building might get noise complaints then if you don't know, and then you're going to lose your reputation of providing them a good solution. And so the companies in my mind that do the testing kind of to match the building or do it the right way and represent it fully, instead of on their website saying I got an IIC 70, if they say I have an IIC on this assembly, in my mind, those are the companies that long-term benefit the most from their sound ratings, because they're providing the real information.
So perfect. You just gave me the answer. So if I have a customer come to me and say, I need a IIC of 62, my answer will be on what? Right? You didn't finish your sentence.
Right,
and I think that's a great way to then get a conversation going about what are you trying to achieve? What's this for? Because that's our biggest stumbling block, is people just come to us with these numbers and have no clue why they need what they need.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, and the reality is you might have situations where that person then they don't want to have the conversation. They want to just check a box, and that's the reality of but that's why, over 10 years, I probably have 5 conversations a week that are like, the person reaches out to me and say, I need an IIC 70. And I say, well, why, where, what, on what? Like I have a lot of conversations and then explaining to them that that's not really what they do need, but I do have people that at the end of the day say, I don't care. Thanks for that information, Dan. I need an ISC 70.
Right,
Like that's fine.
right.
And
I want to check
and
the box.
Yep, and there are, to tell you the God's honest truth, there are ways to do that. There are ways to build what I would say is like a ridiculous assembly, right? Is something that probably is never going to be built in the real world, right? It's you could build uh the one that is successful here at Intertech in York. You could build what we call a high performance floor ceiling system, which is an 8-inch concrete slab, and below the 8-inch concrete slab we have a wire hung suspended ceiling, and then on top of the concrete slab we put a 1-inch thick like fiberglass underlayment, and then 2 layers of wood subfloor. That system, before we even put a flooring down, gets in the high IIC 60s, 67, 68, 69. You put a flooring down, it gets to 70. Like, the flooring did absolutely, did 1% of that overall makeup. And so you could do that, but in my opinion, that's not the world's best way to get numbers. And most commonly, 70s that are out in the marketplace are actually old testing before, from like maybe non-reputable labs. So another thing that you should do in my mind when you are dealing with a competitive product that has a 70 is, if possible, get the test report, and you'll be able to determine whether that testing was kind of accurate or whether there's some issues with the testing. And I would say anything over about 6 years old, so any testing prior to like 2016, I would have some questions about whether that was an accurate test, because some things changed over time. So that would be something I also say is like, you want, when you're selling something and somebody might buy something else instead of yours, you might be able to say like, could you give me the test report? And then a guy named Dan at Intertech who could help you look at that test report and say, hey, this is why I think that test report might have an issue, or maybe why they're not apples to apples. Again, you don't always have those opportunities because sometimes you just kind of get the door shut on you. But if you do, just know that it is possible for me to, I look at test reports a lot from other labs, from anywhere, and can almost always find some reasoning why something got better than it did. If something's too good to be true, it is probably most likely untrue, and there's
Mm-hmm.
probably a reason. There's nothing magical about a flooring and underlayment. There's certain ones that do better than others, of course. That's why we test them and determine. But there's nothing that would cause something to get 8 points better when they're like almost the exact same, other than something kind of disingenuous or incorrect with the test.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
That's fantastic information. And I feel like I'm going to call Daniel later when we're not recording to find out what companies he makes up these fake assemblies for, so we know.
What's also kind of funny to think about is that it's also a sad reality is that once you make a test report, it kind of lives on forever, right? So
Mm-hmm.
if you have a 15-year-old test report and you're using that, of course, if you test it kind of to the current standard and it's 10 points later, you're not going to be thrilled to say, oh, actually it's lower. One thing about our company, the company that I work for at Intertech, me and my boss Jordan have always never wanted to be known as the laboratory that's going to get you the highest rating. I have no desire to be known as that. I want to be known as the lab that gets you the absolute most accurate and repeatable results.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to be able to stand behind that we could test this 5, 10, 15 times and get the same result. And then it's going to match what happens when you put it in a building, because that's really what's going to be the long-term success, is selling products that are then successful in the building. And then they're going to want to come back and say, hey, that worked really well. We didn't have noise complaints. For example, a way that me and my boss have created a good solution for other companies is, I don't know if you guys have heard of Marriott hotels. They're a little bit
Mm-hmm.
popular.
Yeah.
Yeah, they came to me and my boss Jordan and said, hey, we have some noise complaints. 10 years ago, they said their number one complaint was water pressure and the beds. And now 90% of their complaints are noise related. And so they want to get better with their noise. And they said, we're going to require that on an 8-inch concrete slab, you get an IIC 60. And me and my boss, Jordan, are like, well, you're not, you better like carpet. You better want to go back 15
Mm-hmm.
years and do carpet, because the only way you're ever going to get a IIC 60 on an 8-inch slab is with a carpet. And so what we did for Marriott is they invited 5 flooring manufacturers to test like their best acoustic floors, and we got a list of 25 results, and then they were able to say they picked a threshold that was lower than they originally thought, because their threshold at first was too high, right? So another one of these examples of what they were originally going to request was they didn't have the information to make the right decision. So we
Mm-hmm.
helped them get the right information. And so now Marriott has a criteria that on an 8-inch concrete slab, you have to get an IIC 57 to be what they call Marriott approved. And now that's a good benchmark for anyone else to
Mm-hmm.
use.
Mm-hmm.
So anything, if you were doing testing, if you do an 8-inch slab testing, 57 or greater is really kind of the upper echelon of performance. That would mean it's good enough that Marriott says, hey, this could go in our hotel. And so typically to achieve that, you need to have either a topical underlayment or a really good attached pad. And it has to be. I get a lot of 56s, and the clients are usually pretty sad about that because you're so close. But
Mm-hmm.
that's an example of kind of how you take the numbers that are just kind of silly and these high numbers and actually create a metric that's more reasonable, more applicable to the real world. And in order to pick that 8-inch slab result, they went out and looked at all their hotels, did a business study, and said that 70% of their hotels are 8-inch concrete slab. So that's why they picked that slab, that thickness. And so yeah, I mean that's a something that we do. And then we have other flooring people that what they do is they test on like 6 assemblies, right? They come in and they have, this is a really popular floor, I sell a lot of it. I'm going to test it on a 6-inch slab, an 8-inch slab, an open web truss, which is very common in the multifamily industry, and then a 2x10, which is very common in the residential market. And so they kind of have like data points that are not just one result. They have data points across like 6 base assemblies that they then can use to sell in different markets. So
So
that's something I do.
that's perfect. So I think that'd be good to go over. What are the maybe 4 to 5 most common systems that you guys that you see out there and that you guys test for?
Yeah, I'd say the very most common assembly that we test, I have it installed every week, is a 6-inch concrete slab. That's
Okay.
super common in almost all commercial construction. And even if 7 or 8 is common, a lot of my clients really like testing on the 6-inch because that's what we, again, called our worst case scenario. If you get a good tester's report on the 6-inch, then it's really good to apply to a 7 or an 8-inch. And then I have so 6-inch concrete is what really popular. An 18-inch open web truss I test all the time as well. That's super common in multifamily, in like all these huge apartment buildings or 4-story hotels. Almost every 4-story hotel across the United States is made with an 18-inch open web truss. Um, I'm also in a unique position where I get to see a lot of the new building trends and
Mm-hmm.
new building things. So right now we're doing a lot of testing on what we call mass timber assemblies that are these big buildings that are made out of like all wood. So
Mm-hmm.
picture like a lot of like I do a lot of 5-ply CLT testing, cross laminated timber testing. So it's kind of fun. If I get one test, then typically in the next month I get about 5 or 6 other clients who are like, "Oh, have you heard of this new building?" And I'm like, "Yeah, we have one here." And that is one point that I wanted to point out too, is that my company we have a laboratory where the floor ceiling assembly is able to be removed from the acoustical chamber. So I have 70 different floor ceiling assembly options here at my lab. So if you say I need to do a 6-inch slab, 8-inch slab, I don't have to start from scratch. I have that sitting in the lab and I can put it in the chamber. So that saves you money, time, and then it also makes it really repeatable. If you come back and test on the 6-inch slab a year later, you're most likely testing on the exact same 6-inch slab. So when we talk it scientifically about removing variables, there's no better way to remove variables than having it be literally the exact same slab or open web truss. Or so it's we have done studies where 3 years later we do the same duplicate test as just a check, and they're like identical. So we're
Wow.
very we do that very well here at Intertech.
So which of those platforms, I'll call them, is just best on its own? Which one is most acoustically sound? I guess I'll call it.
Sure. Yeah. So, and that's another kind of interesting thing is that in acoustics, a lot of times like I answer questions and people think I'm just trying to be like shady or not answer things right. But you always kind of have to balance that there's the 2 ratings that we talked about, that STC and IIC. concrete slabs are really good on STC. They're things that stop airborne sound are weight. The more the mass, the better. So concrete is like kicking butt on STC, but because it's dense and heavy, it hurts on IIC. So when we're talking acoustically, I'm always like, well,
That's a good point.
which one are we looking at? So STC on concrete slab buildings is always really good, and then IIC is worse. And then again, we also have to look at when we're talking at sound, the STC and IIC value, they take a lot of frequencies from like low frequency, which is like really percussive thuds, to high frequency, which is like whistling, and they make one rating from all of those frequencies, and so they make it so it's simple, but then it's taking something very complicated and making it a single number rating. So there are times where something's actually better on some frequencies and worse on other frequencies, but the rating is better. So better is a hard term, it's like, but what we do see a lot of people do, to kind of answer your main point, is we see a lot of people test like on a 6-inch slab with a ceiling below, because if you add the ceiling below, you're going to get a higher baseline starting point. And so that's a good marketing number. I have some people that come in here and say, let's do the real test that's going to be the building. And then I need a marketing number. I need something to put on my packaging or talk about to have a good number. I need to address these people who say I need a 60 or something. And so we have many people that come in and test 6-inch slab and 6-inch slab with ceiling to cover those two topics: real numbers, marketing numbers. And there are times where they do a ceiling in a building. A lot of times they'll do a ceiling below in bathrooms, and like because you need to have that ceiling to run your fans and your ductwork. And bathrooms typically would have the hardest surface floor, like tile, which is the worst acoustically. So that there are actual real world scenarios where a ceiling would be built below a 6-inch slab. So it's not really like the true fairy tale assembly, but that's what I get a lot of people do. They do 6-inch slab and 6-inch slab at ceiling at the same time to cover both those results.
So we've talked a lot about IIC and STC, but I know that I've heard Delta or Delta IIC. What is that? And is that worth continuing to discuss?
Absolutely. A Delta IIC is like my favorite acoustical rating because it just addresses a lot of the things that we just talked about. And my boss Jordan, he's actually the chairman of the ASTM E2179 committee, which deals with Delta IIC.
Ooh.
So remember how we talked about how the first question is on what?
Right.
Delta IIC immediately answers that question without any need to say, because a Delta IIC test is done on a 6-inch concrete slab with no ceiling. So that's how you have to do it on that. The reality is, I said 6-inch slab, but the standard right now says 150 millimeters, which is almost 6 inches, plus or minus 50 millimeters. And my boss Jordan is trying to that 50 millimeters is kind of a big range. So in this most
almost
recent,
2 inches, right?
Yeah, exactly right. So you could really test it on a 4 or an 8, and that's just not that goes away from what we are trying to do, which is make it really simple. And so in the last ASTM meetings that just happened like 2 weeks ago, my boss is trying to get it to be 150 millimeters plus or minus 10 millimeters. So it's really like definitively 6-inch slab. So, but at this moment in time, it could be like 150 plus or minus 50. But the root of the test is that you test at that same laboratory on that same day. So any lab you go to, whether it be me or someone else, which you don't ever do, you come to me and I do it for you. We test our 6-inch slab. Then we add a flooring or flooring and underlayment combination, either one, and we test an IIC test on that. And what we are determining is the improvement on that concrete slab. So let's just pick some kind of ballpark numbers. If I start at an IIC 30 on my bare concrete slab, and then I add your flooring and I get an IIC 50, your delta would be around 20. The math is not as simple as that because there's some kind of high level, 10,000 different calculations, but ballpark, it's that number. It's that improvement of the IIC result from bare concrete slab to so let's say another lab gets their concrete slab is built a little differently, or it's kind of fancy, or they did something, disingenuous, whatever it might be. Their base slab starts at 33. So they're 3 points better than me, which I would say is wrong. I'd say it's inaccurate. But then when they do their IIC test, they get a 53. That's still a 20-point improvement. And right. So Delta IIC to me is the singular most comparable result. And it takes away the ability to do any system you want, right? It's immediately answers what slab it's on. It's on a 6-inch slab with no ceiling, and it takes away the lab's differences because that lab has to test their own slab that same day. And then, so in fact, almost all of Europe, they focus on what they call delta L and W, which is the same thing as delta IIC. And so I don't know why in America we got hung up on these IIC results and let the wild west of whatever you want to test. If we only did delta IIC, you guys would save a ton of money because you wouldn't have to test on 70 of these assemblies, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that would be another way that I literally debunk almost all those IIC, those crazy IIC numbers. Is if you get the delta IIC number from somebody who's claiming an IIC 70, it's almost always accurate because it has to be, right? And so sometimes there's times where they're advertising an IIC 72, but their delta IIC is 25, and your product that you tested genuinely is an IIC 25, a delta IIC 25 as well, but you're advertising an IIC 65 because you did it on a 6-inch slab with ceiling. So that delta, if I own a building, which unfortunately I don't own a a 40-story building, which someday maybe, I would only ask for delta IIC. If somebody came to me with IIC numbers, unless it was exactly the same construction of my building, I would throw it in the garbage and say, give me your delta IIC, and I would buy the flooring and underlayment combination with the best delta IIC numbers because it takes away that game playing, and it standardizes the performance. So delta IIC is extremely important. The reason that people maybe don't do it all the time is because the numbers are lower, right? They're not 70, and they're like, oh, well, delta 20, that doesn't sound that. Delta IC 20, I want a 70, right? Like, I want to buy the 70. But it's you just have to educate people that delta IC is the singular best comparative rating between flooring and underlayments, and it's very important. If you do a 6-inch slab test, you only pay $300 extra to get the delta IIC added. So it like literally hurts my heart when people come here and they get just the 6-inch slab IIC result. I'm like, get the delta, it's right there. Like, come on, like I'm begging you. That's a good result to have.
What do you think we can do as an industry to help make that adjustment? Is there certain, it just seems like
we've complicated it.
Yeah, we've made it. Yeah. Well, and I mean, he said that I can save a whole bunch of money if I didn't do all these different assembly tests and stuff. So it goes back to our complaint over AC ratings too. Like, how do we as an industry stop being crazy cowboys and just all trying to do our own thing and get on the same page about using, an accurate testing system so that we can compare ourselves to each other?
Right. I think Delta seems like the way to go. Do you see that growing? Do you see more and more people requesting Delta ratings?
I think a lot of people do request it because we're advocates for it. We believe in it. We talk about it a lot. But I do unfortunately see, I kind of just took a little exception holiday that it's not, the testing that we're doing on assemblies is not inaccurate, right? It's accurate to that assembly.
Yeah.
But I mean, it might be kind of like a little bit extra. And here's some other concerns about Delta IIC in that really does a beautiful job on concrete slabs or commercial construction. Okay. So they standardize the 6-inch slab. Now, however, those Delta IIC results don't always correlate beautifully when we go to a wood frame construction or this new construction of CLT. Sometimes the things that do the best on concrete slabs, they don't always do the best. The rank ordering is not the same when you move to a different entire type of system. So that's what I think is that we should have Delta IIC systems on wood frame where we come together as a community, an acoustical community where the manufacturers are there, the test labs are there, the building owners are there, and we say, well, what would be the standard wood frame construction so we could have a couple more of these Delta base assemblies? And we try and do that here at Intertech. I really try and have a standard wood construction I utilize so that almost all the people testing are testing on a very comparable system, but that's unfortunately not in a standard yet. There's no wood frame Delta IIC construction, but I do think you should either be testing the building that's being built or testing Delta IIC. So you should either be matching a construction that is a real building, or you shouldn't be doing these fairy tale assemblies. I would, if somebody needs that, make sure that they sign 5 pieces of paper that say I know what I'm doing and I know what I'm requesting, because I don't want to spend a lot of our time and energy doing something that's not applicable to the real world.
So I think my next question is what, and obviously this is just your opinion, what do you think is the best assembly that we can recommend um, for a condo project, apartment type project to get the best sound rating? Should they always have a certain um, type of underlayment? What are the pieces that we should always be recommending that they add to get the best result?
Sure. What I think is what I see my clients do really well is having a good database of what you've already tested and trying to match up perfectly quickly, right? Because you want to be quick about your results. You don't want to have somebody say, "Do you have this sound rating?" and then you're like, "Let me look through a file folder 7 states away and let you know." So one thing I have done um, for you guys is I create what I call an acoustical master summary, which is like every assembly you guys have ever tested.
Mm-hmm.
And you, as a company, you guys do have like 25 different acoustical tests that you've done with me here.
Mm-hmm.
So, in my opinion, the most successful clients, they're able to get a request. You get an email that say, "Do you have this result?" And your first response to that client, unless they tell you already, like my building's an 8-inch slab, ask them, "What's your building? Could you have a drawing of your building or details about the building you're in?" And then you go to this master summary and you look at what you've already tested, and odds are you have something that is almost identical. Because one thing that your company has done is you've done a good job of having a decent spread of results. So you've had some testing on a 6-inch slab, a 6-inch slab with ceiling, a 7-inch slab, an 8-inch slab, a 2x10, an 18-inch open web truss, a concrete on steel deck assembly, and some testing on a 5-ply CLT, and some testing on an 11 and 7/8 TJI. So you guys really, truly, I say this with the utmost sincerity, you guys have tested on a lot of assemblies.
Mm-hmm.
So you have data points across more than almost all your competitors. Most people kind of get in this hole of testing on all 8-inch slab, or
Mm-hmm.
if they've done 100 tests with me, they've had 95 of them on 8-inch slab, and you guys really have a good spread. But what you want to make sure you have is that somebody in your company has access to that file with all the results and can get that results like really quickly. Some of the competitors that I've seen do really good. They have these programs where they can, acoustic selectors where you can pick the base assembly and pick the floor, and the end user can get that test report like immediately.
Mm-hmm.
Or I've done testing for clients where I've done 1,000 tests, and they create like a sound and fire manual that is hundreds of pages long. Now the funny thing about this particular manual is that this manual probably has about $1 million worth of testing in it. So you
Wow.
you can do that. That's an option, but that's like 5 years of work, and it comes out to be just a book where you can just scroll through and say, okay, this is my system, and what am I gonna get? Um,
Mm-hmm.
but the genuine thing that I like to tell people is that having somebody that can quickly access the data and understands what the base assemblies are is a huge market improvement. Something that would set you apart from your competitors is to be able to give them a report that's not only a good result but accurate to their building quickly would be very successful.
Mm-hmm.
And then what you can do also is you can make a list of what you've been requested that you haven't been able to answer, right? So if you've had eight emails asking for, an assembly, and you've had to give them something close to it, or say like, we can test it. Another thing that you can do is you can also push some of the cost of testing off to the person requesting, right? You can do projects where the building owner pays 50% or
Mhm.
75%, or we do that a lot where I work together with multiple companies to split the invoice or to work together. So it doesn't always mean that the flooring guy has to pay all the bills. So that's another thing to keep in mind.
I've got a very basic question. I don't, and if you can answer it.
Yeah.
By nature, are there products that are more sound resistant than others? You made a comment earlier that stone or tile obviously has
Yeah.
the highest sound. Wood,
Yeah.
laminate,
Yeah.
luxury vinyl. Where do they all fall just
Sure.
naturally?
Yeah, I'd say like kind of like in a generalized terminology,
Hmm.
all things else being equal,
Yep.
your worst flooring is usually like a sheet vinyl or a 2 millimeter glue down. That would give you very little acoustical benefit, right?
Right.
And then beyond that, then you would maybe go to um, maybe like a click lock that doesn't have a pad, maybe like a 5mm LVT with no pad. That would be in the same range as like maybe a laminate or a engineered wood with no acoustical padding. And then you start to see the real good floorings being anything with an attached pad. And then also flooring wise, I'm always like a very tactile person. I love to touch the floorings that I'm testing. And usually the softer they are, the more resilience they have, the better they're going to perform, because the hammers are impacting that. And so if they have the ability to absorb some sound, some of that impact, all sound is energy. So if they're softer, they're going to do a little bit better. But the interesting thing is that I'm smart enough to realize that acoustics is not the only concern. That you guys also have to deal with durability, waterproofing, things like that. So sometimes things that help you for sound might hurt you for durability. And so if you put a really thick underlayment, or and another thing I like to teach people about sound is that using dissimilar materials. So if you did foam, if you had like an IXP foam, doing 3mm of that is not going to be as good as doing like 1.5mm of that and then a cork or a rubber. So all of those different materials, every physical material has some frequencies that they help stop. And so when you use dissimilar materials, they work better together. And then another thing that people have happen is that there is a law of diminishing returns in acoustics, where as you start to, if you have an underlayment, that's a big deal. It helps a lot. But if you have more underlayment or 2 underlayments, you start to not have as big of a deal. It's not as important. And so I get a lot of times people will test a 2mm and a 4mm and a 6mm, and they don't see it keep going up, and they're like, oh, you ran the test wrong. And it's like, no, you just don't see the improvement as you get to thicker. So there's a lot to learn. It's when I do testing, every time I run a test, it makes me want to do 2 more tests, because there's so much to learn from it. And there's so many variables that come into play. Whether a flooring is glued down or floated, that would affect the sound. And whether it's installed different directions and things like that, there's so many things that come into play. And then ceramic tile is the worst. Yeah, that's and
this is why we saw none of it.
Yeah, exactly. Ceramic tile does not do good for sound. Now, there's people that work really hard. They focus their energy on trying to create an underlayment underneath tile that can help with sound. But the challenging thing with that is that you really can't mess with the durability of it, right? You can't have cracking of tile and cracking of that. So that's a tough nut to crack. But that's the other interesting thing from my perspective at the lab, is that I get to test for so many kind of interesting people and clients, because I could test for a flooring and underlayment. I test for the OSB subfloor guys. I test for the people that make joists. I test for drywall guys. I can test for the building owner. It's just an unbelievable list of people that I can test for, and we do a lot of really kind of fun projects that I swear every single day for 10 years I've learned multiple new things every day. And so it's been fun.
That's wonderful. Well, I know that at this point in my mind is like there's so many things that I'm like rethinking. Why have we been doing this way? We need to change our process and do things differently. Like my brain is going.
Also clarified so many misnomers or things that we've been told or heard that just aren't true. And so it's good to just get the basis of it.
Thank you so much, Daniel. I think this is good for today. I think this is a good 101, and I feel like we definitely need him back again later to dive in even deeper.
Passion, I can tell. There's more passion in Daniel to be tapped into.
Yes.
Absolutely. And I love to tell everybody that that's our job here at Intertech. I'm not just a testing guy. I'm trying to educate and trying to keep the community running. There's many more topics to discuss too. There's some new things in the last 2 years that we could talk about. There's some new kind of new ratings that are but I again kind of think you're right that is better for like a 201 class or more discussion, because you do want to make sure that in my opinion you want to have the foundation of STC and IIC before you start talking about other ratings, because if you're not really solid about it, and then I would always like people to know that my phone line is always open. People can email, call me. My favorite thing is to answer questions about acoustics, because the more you understand about it, the more you're going to be able to successfully talk about it, which is going to lead to more testing and more projects together. And I even talk to condo boards a lot. I even tell them, like when the condo board calls me and wants a 70, I'm always I'm always willing to educate people, and sometimes that helps you guys, because sometimes coming from you, like, it doesn't have the same weight as coming from the lab where they can
Absolutely.
say like, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm always willing to do that, because I understand the position that you're in, where so when you have people that are checking a box at 1 of 70, don't hesitate to let them contact me directly, and I can speak on your behalf, where like a 70 is kind of a ridiculous request when they don't even know what their building is, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh,
We've got a new resource.
I know. I
Well,
feel so
I'm
good
happy.
now.
Yeah.
Hey, we really appreciate you taking the time to go through all this with us. Your passion for sound abatement and just the industry is awesome.
Yeah.
We're really looking forward to getting this one out to the folks in our community.
Awesome. Hey, thanks again so much for having me. Hope everybody enjoys their weekend. It's only a couple hours for us here in York, PA, to get to the weekend.
Wonderful. Thank you
Awesome.
so much. Have a wonderful weekend, and we will talk to you again soon.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks
Bye.
again.
What the Floor is a TNA Supply Company, Inc. original production. You can find out more about us at tasupply.com or tasflooring.com.
This show is produced by Jose Morales with help from Tony Collier and Jessica Reiser. Hosted by Holiday Van Aram and Michael Gurria.
Tell us what you think of the show by emailing us at WTFpodcast@tasupply.com or on the social medias, #WhatTheFloorPodcast.